welcome to Really. I'm a Caribbean great grandson. How are you guys today? Here on JLJ Media. This episode, I'm actually bringing on another Caribbean American. I love that. And being here on the West Coast, there's not a lot of us running around. And when I was growing up, hardly any. So it's nice to see there's more and more coming. So they'll be on the show too. But he's first because he's first in my life. Here's my friend. He's a podcaster, host, auctioneer, DJ. He's a one man band, does it all. And I listed him this way on purpose. He's Flobo Boyce.
Oh yes, I forgot about that.
I'm not gonna make you say first that you're a government name, but Caribbean is part of this.
Yeah, absolutely is. And my last name is pretty Caribbean AF. So no, thanks for having me on the show, man. Like we were saying before we went live, I brought my little bit of rum because I know a lot of times conversations happen at the rum shop after a long day of work. So
I have rum too. I get to right there. And cheers to being Caribbean. It's like, my voice is getting smoother all of a sudden.
There you go. So, yeah, man.
I haven't drank this in the daytime in a long time.
Hey, it's nighttime somewhere.
It's nighttime somewhere. It's not here. It's nighttime in New York. Mm-hmm. So my voice all of a sudden is going crazy. So we'll see how this goes.
It's going crazy.
So, folks, I'm doing the show, as you know, as a love letter to my great grandparents and beyond. And you guys are learning with me. I have the St. Eustatius flag behind me, which is also called Statia. And other episodes I've explained, and I will be explaining my journey with this and what this all means. But I have a friend who's Caribbean. It's been a lot of fun because Flo and I we have little things we can say to each other and pass on to each other, Caribbean humor and stuff that we can get that I didn't have before growing up here in California. Flobo, can you tell folks at home listening or watching your Caribbean connection?
Yeah, first of all, I didn't even know St. Eustatius. Is that a new flag? That flag looks new to me, by the way.
It's their flag, really.
Yeah, well, I guess when I was a kid, it was just the Dutch one. So yes, I'm first generation. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, to West Indian parents. That's a very big West Indian culture there. My parents are both from Barbados, same island, same parish. They're from St. Lucie Parish, which is so rural that if you live on an island, the people go, "Oh, St. Lucie, that's far, yeah." And so it was kind of cool to see how, and probably get into it, how my parents came from such a rural part of the island to make it into the United States. But I've been kind of walking two worlds growing up. Sometimes you felt you were neither. Sometimes you feel you're both. It's kind of a fun little journey there, but definitely first generation American, to say the least.
Yes, and our connection is that I have been to Barbados, actually, folks. I went, and that's how I saw St. Eustatius, which I'll tell you about that in another episode. How I actually saw it. I saw the island. But I went to Barbados on vacation, had the best time, had a good time there. Very Caribbean and colonial at the same time. Loved it. It was good. It was very good. Had a great time on the beach, had a good time. Made friends. Their first names were like O'Neill and Wentworth. That was their first names. So I loved it. That's the first island I went to was kind of like that. And so for me, that come from several islands in the Caribbean. That's why I'm focusing on this one. But going to New York, that's our other connection that Flo and I have, is that my mother and their niece from New York.
Oh, yeah.
The Caribbean.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of funny if you are into like aviation, how when Pan Am took a lot of those Caribbean flight paths, how so many settlements were up and down the eastern seaboard. So you can go to Miami, you can go to Boston, New York, Halifax, Toronto, and like little like hubs for West Indian cultures. That's kind of fun to watch. But the New York one was definitely the biggest one for a long time.
For me, growing up in the 70s and 80s, anything Caribbean was the South or the East. We just didn't. I grew up with a huge Creole culture. Of course, that's the other part of my family from Louisiana, or as we call it, Louisiana. I grew up a lot of Asian culture, which is also part of my life, and then mostly Central South America and Mexico here on the West Coast and Pacific Islander. So we had that out here. I would go visit New York, folks. When I started visiting in the early 80s, was my first time in New York, seeing my family. That's when I was introduced to West Indians. That's when I was introduced to more Puerto Ricans. That's when I was introduced to Cubans and Dominicans. But there's something about that that's very interesting. And I want to get to this right away, actually. West Indian bias. What's
Oh,
funny is when I went to New York, it was highly, you were highly celebrated. It was back in the 70s and 80s. It was highly celebrated to be Puerto Rican or Dominican, not West Indian,
mhm.
not Jamaican. Jamaican's not West Indies, but there was still some bias for that too. I can't talk much about that. But I know for West Indian, those Dutch Antilles Islands, those British islands down there, there's a lot of bias. And so I want to know, did you also experience that too later in the 80s,
Yeah,
90s?
absolutely. So it depends on who you ask, right? As far as what the cause of that was. But by the time West Indians, and by that, that's a working term because there's people who don't hate the term because it just kind of puts the colonial stamp on things. But my working definition, which may not be the complete definition, is that it's usually the non-speaking Caribbean. And that really came in the early 80s. That was a big influx through the United States, whether it was from the lowering of airline fares or whether it was from refugees with Operation Just Cause in Grenada. And so we had a big wash of Black West Indians coming to the city in the early 80s. And if you know, what also came to the city in the early 80s was the crack epidemic. Not saying one caused the other, but a lot of conflation happened there. So my parents came in the 1970s, so we were about before that wave. But the idea was kind of like we celebrated Puerto Rican culture. They were there 56 or 60 years before. Puerto Ricans fought in the war for the United States. They were pretty much considered an enclave to the United States, even though sometimes people argue whether or not they have full rights and all that stuff. But everything from the African side of the Caribbean stuff was seen as shunned else. And we got it from both ways because for the Africans or the Black Americans, we were the latest immigrant group. And usually when a new immigrant group comes into a city, the fears that they'll take jobs or opportunities. So we got that from that side, whereas we didn't speak Spanish. And so we were kind of onto our own and very insular. So to this day, I mean, now it's called, ironically, Little Haiti. But in Newkirk and Church Avenue and Flatbush Avenue, when I was a kid, were pretty much the cross centers of West Indian New
Oh,
York.
Church
And
Avenue. My God.
Church Avenue, Pickett, Jamaica Ave, like these were like main thoroughfares. We would go and connect and tell stories and buy the food we couldn't get down the block. I mean, shout out to Western Beef, man, hold it down for families. You know what I mean? Getting oxtail and things. So
Oh my God.
yeah.
You just brought me back. Okay, so my grandmother, for another side of well, same side of family, but another side of family.
Mhm.
Not my biological grandmother. She's my Grand Susie, who I love very much, who lived my grandfather, who was biological, in they call it now Kensington, but it was Fort Hamilton Parkway,
Sure.
Park Slope, whatever. They lived in Church Avenue. That's where Food Town is and everything. Go to
Oh
Church
yeah. Yeah.
Avenue. So so when I would go to New York, I even had two worlds there. And that's something that recently ago. I had two worlds there. I would go to visit my great grandmother and all them in Washington Heights or Spanish Harlem. That's where my mother was born and raised. Or and then half time, the other half time was in Brooklyn, in Fort Hamilton Parkway, Park Slope, Prospect Park. Over here, it was Puerto Ricans, Dominicans. You guys are beautiful, great, and celebrate. Over here, the Jamaicans live here. The West Indians are here. They're getting on our
Mhm.
nerves.
Right.
Smell their food. They have their music.
Yeah.
And I heard that as a kid. I mean, I really heard the difference. I didn't understand it. I'm just like, they're both again, as a person who's mixed race myself, who already went through the white black stuff in California. Now I'm going through the West Indian. They're both Caribbean, but one's West Indian and one's Spanish.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it deserves some. Obviously, it's New York City, right? It's always cross pollination. Sometimes we love our red beans and rice. Sometimes we get our hair done by Dominicans, as Jay Z said. But you're right. There really was a divide with the culture, and when you're on the black side and your food is different, and things were sometimes the stereotypes were poorly educated or used to the marijuana. A lot of times there was a bit of that disconnect there, and I think the example I say in jest when we do our lunches or we drives is the parades, right? Like when the Puerto Rican Day Parade comes to New York, it's a big deal. It's on NBC. It's during the day. They bring Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's high-fiving Jennifer Lopez. They got floats, and it's like right there. Lolita Lopez is hosting the thing. When the West Indian Day Parade comes, and that's usually Labor Day, they'll bring a crew out there. They'll record like 20 seconds, and at the end of the newscast, like, all right, that's sports. Here's some black people dancing. Seinfeld's up next, and that's it. You get 30 seconds. That's just the way it is. And so it's interesting because I'll go to a Caribbean store and like Iowa or some like random Florida, and we kind of accept that. But going inside New York City, it was a very clear divide between the Dominicans, and they have their own issues with color and that issue also, and the Puerto Ricans being separate from the non-Spanish speaking
Yes.
Caribbean. And I will even say Haiti for a while at first was separate too, because there was that language barrier, but then over time, the Haitian influence got too big to ignore, and that's become kind of integrated. But growing up, the English-speaking Caribbean kind of kept to themselves: Jamaicans, Bajans, Trinidadians, Grenadans, even Guyanese, which are technically South American, and the Belizeans, which are technically Central American.
Don't the Haitians aren't eating cats and dogs?
Yeah.
Cat,
Uh,
eat the cat. Eat
oh
the cat.
man.
Eat
The
the cat.
Jamaican booty scratcher, Haitian booty scratches. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's in. I joke with Flobo sometimes. We hanging out. I miss the old dirty New York. I do. I
Mm.
miss it sometimes. I know I know Giuliani cleaned it up and everything. I miss the old,
It's
Hell's
coming back. It's coming back. Dirt's coming back, bro.
It's not the same. But like Hell's Kitchen, you didn't go to Hell's Kitchen. You didn't go over there. You went over there with prostitutes and gangs, and it was dangerous to go over there. Times Square was dangerous. I mean, it was like
Yeah.
I loved it. I mean, it was like my grandfather. Speaking of Caribbean grandparents, Grandpa Bob, may rest in peace, would carry a stick. When the first time I came in. My first time in New York was 1984.
Oh.
So I was 15 years old. That's the first time I went to New York. I had been built up in New York, New York, New York, New York, New York. My mother, because she back then had it, her accent was thicker. Yeah, as you're my mom, so it's changed more. It comes out of certain words, but it was like thicker than. And I remember talking to one of her friends from high school recently, not too long ago. She goes, "Yeah, your name was Bonita, and you had this. You were exotic." She goes, "You really thought because in California, you never heard someone sound like you guys or have the name Bonita. I mean, like it was just like, what are you talking about?" And she came out to California. It was kind of fun to hear her listen to this person. When you came to high school, we're talking like the early '60s. You were so
Mhm.
exotic to us out here. We didn't have that out here. Uh,
Absolutely.
and one of the reasons why, as maybe this is why I like you, of course, but one of the reasons why I like you is because you sound like New Yorkers. You sound like my people. And but it's a comfort thing. It's like, I associate New York with good stuff. Even the bad New York, I associate it with good stuff. So my grandfather would have a stick. And I remember the first time we got on the subway, my first time ever on a subway. I'm from LA, where there's no subway.
Yeah. Right. Well,
And
that.
back now, we have whatever. But back then, there was nothing there. So he goes, just stand next to me, and we're going to Chase Manhattan Bank downtown. That's where he worked. He's going to show me off to the grandson's visiting. He's like 6'3", tall, thick, had his backpack. He's like me, we're bag people. He had his leather backpack, and he was ready to beat people's ass. That was his whole thing. And I remember getting on the subway going, I was in love. I was like, the subway. Like,
Yeah.
wow, it's so dirty. I love it. And there's so much graffiti everywhere. And we're in here like sandwich, like we're like sardines just packed in here. And I was like short. I was like, thanks to my grandfather. I loved every minute of it. I did. And you heard different music. You heard Caribbean music on the train.
Yeah.
Everybody was dressed different. And coming from LA, it was like I thought we were multicultural. I feel like New York is way more multicultural because it's just a denser city.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's the same. I think the cultures are there. Like it's like I find a Bayesian person every 9 months out here in Los Angeles. But I think because there's a lack of personal space in New York, everyone's on top of each other because we can only afford certain neighborhoods to live in. So you're gonna get everything. And if I decide to open up, say, a beef patty and cocoa bread stand as a Jamaican person in LA, you have to be conscious of like the location. Whereas in New York, as long as it's hot, people come and see you. Like not too far. Don't be up there in Florida and be like, "What's up?" But like you understand, everyone knows what the deal is using public transport and all that stuff. But funny thing about the subways, I avoided the subways for a long time. My dad worked for the Metropolitan Transit. He worked for the MTA for 34 years. And so I took the bus till I just couldn't do it. Until I had to learn the subway system. Because my dad went through Rapid Division, which we call the subways Rapid. It was kind of like, ugh, that's my dad's thing with trains and give me the bus, please. You know what I mean?
And I learned this in New York because I used to take the M13. I was in New York, and it was like that means Manhattan. Then you have the Q35. That means Queen. I know what the
Mm-hmm.
letters meant, but they're all every borough. They have their own different.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Brooklyn is BX, right, or is it just B?
So, BX is Bronx. B is just Brooklyn. B41 goes to Atlantic Ave.
Yeah.
Barclays,
Oh,
yeah.
I know Atlantic Avenue. Oh, I know
Mhm.
that. Anyway, I associate New York so much with such fond memories, but it was such a concrete jungle. Living in, and I've lived in New York. Years later, I lived in New York for a while, but I also lived in San Francisco, which is a mini New York to me.
Mhm.
Very concrete jungle, very dense, heavily subwayed. Have a small place to live. The whole thing. But I just noticed, even with the different divides, it was still a celebration. I saw things I didn't see in Los Angeles. It was a part of my life, and why I'm doing this podcast. I'm trying to connect to that part of my life because I've been to the Caribbean. I've been to 13 islands over my
Wow.
time, and I love it. I don't know
Yeah.
about you when you go. I feel partially at home there.
It's hard to say. So when you have parents from a singular place, which I think we're the opposite because you have like 25 cultures. I just got the one. I think I'm like far enough, just some Scottish in there, but that's about it. So as a kid, we went every summer. And at the time, I didn't realize in the context of Barbados where my parents were kind of from. So imagine being in New York and having cartoons and candy you love and friends that you know, and then my cousins are living out on pastures and we're wrangling black belly sheep and we're trying to get the Coke bottles to return it for deposits and stuff. And so by the time I was like 10, I was like over it. And I was like, oh, you gotta go back again. Can we go to Disney World like all my other friends? Can we go to like someplace else? Like, and I remember my 14th birthday, I really wanted to fly somewhere alone. That's kind of what I want. I wanted a ticket to fly unaccompanied somewhere, and my mom didn't know where else to take me. Sent me. So she sent me to my cousin's house in Barbados for a summer. Spent 5 weeks, 7 weeks there, and I came back and I was like, I'm never going back. And I didn't go back for like 17 years after that. I just could not stand the contrast. But I since went back, and I kind of appreciate now what the suburbs look like, what the fancy part looks like, like the Fontebelle slums where Rihanna's from, what that looks like, how having all this land and my parents did, it was like a different kind of vibe. Yeah, they consider country bumpkins in that context, but it kind of makes you more proud of where they come from. But the idea is that since my only tether to my culture or my parents, when you get to a certain age, you want to rebel. Like first generation kids have a real tough time where it's like, I know I'm here in America to be an American, but I gotta like hold on to old traditions and be American at the same time. Second generation, they kind of either choose to do full on, go back and live amongst the land or say, I'm good. But first generations are always walking the tightrope. And so for a long time, I rejected that culture. You go into that a moment too. And only now, when I think identity politics have come back in American politics, I realize I gotta find out, take inventory of who I am to make sure I know who I am if things assail me, like, I don't know, getting deported or something.
Well, I know one other Bayesian, and that is my friend Stevenson, friend of Tony Moore's. And did not know he was Bayesian until one day we just started talking. And again, so you guys are so quiet about your Bayesianness. And he didn't like bring it up. I was like, he goes, yeah, my family, my mother's here. And he started saying something. I go, that's like a Caribbean mother. And he goes, oh yeah, she's from Barbados.
It's different.
And I knew him for years. I know he was Barbadian.
I mean, look at the African the experience here in the United States. Like when I was a kid, well, yes, for sure. I mean, I was like, no, but yeah, yeah, yeah. Because when I was a kid, Africans used to pretend. They used to pretend to be West Indian because that was still more in vogue than being African. So when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, and Tony's a little older than I am, right?
Okay.
Yeah, no one really knew that whole part of the country except for Jamaica. So when you said, yeah, I'm from that area, people were like, oh, yeah, John, man, I love Bob Marley, man. And so it got to the point where it's not like now where you can like shame them online and say, educate yourself. I'm from there. Back then, if someone said coconut to man, you had to either laugh it off or take it. So a lot of times I used to say nothing. I'd be like, I'm from the Caribbean. Where? It doesn't matter. So back in the year 1996, BR, before Rihanna, I really wasn't anywhere. I was
I was
just,
saying for Rihanna because of
yeah,
Rihanna. Yes.
yeah, I wasn't anywhere. But now people are like, oh, where Rihanna's from? Do you know her? I'm like, no, but you can tell we got the same forehead, so we're family. But she lives in St. Michael, which is literally the opposite side of the island. Now I know because of where my parents are from.
Forehead. You guys have some pronounced foreheads, yes.
We do.
Pronounced. This means you're smarter. That's all it means.
It does not, but I'll take it.
You're Miss Fenty. Well, so she obviously she's smart because she's doing what she's doing, so obviously she worked it out.
Like I told you the other time we hung out, she is actually a national hero of Barbados. So like for context, there's like 10 or 11 now, like heroes that are instrumental to the history of the island. I'm talking about like prime ministers, slave rebellion uprisers, and Rihanna. So if I ever meet this woman, I have to refer to her as the right excellent Robin Rihanna Fenty.
Excuse me.
That,
All right,
yeah, that's kind of cool. All right, so you're saying.
that is kind of cool actually. Go on, girl. Um, where when did the pride hit you? If you have any pride of that you have a culture you come from. I mean, I don't know, maybe you don't. I don't know, maybe you do, you don't. I mean, I know you're a pride of New York, you're a pride of Brooklyn, we all have that stuff. But do you have a pride of being Bayesian Barbadian?
It's actually the answer is yes. It's a small one because of so many years I had elected not to visit. I was worried that I would be accepted or not. And this is another thing that first generation kids deal with. You go back, you're too American for them, but you're not American for enough for Americans. It's kind of a weird roundabout thing. I play this video game called Rocket League, which is basically
Oh,
cars playing soccer, and they give you the option on your car to throw a flag on the top. And so that was the first time of like almost small training of being okay with showing my pride, quote unquote, in public. Granted, I'm behind a computer screen or whatever, but then I got to be more and more secure about saying who I am, what I was asking for. Every Independence Day, which is November 30th, I would start to buy some merchandise or a T-shirt, do a little a photo shoot or something like that. So small, very social media, very small steps. I no two recipes. I've always done them. I know how to make sauce. I know how to make sweetbread. But I sort of learned more. I was like, what if I have to pass it down to someone? What can I do? And it really was a gradual process for me to be like, it's okay. I don't have to. I defend my culture, yes, but I am not responsible for holding on to the entirety of that culture, even though someone may try to take me down or denigrate me for not being Bayesian enough or being American enough. It is no longer my responsibility to take the entirety of that. But that took me like I was in my mid 30s when I kind of had that reconciliation. It wouldn't have been accelerated if I had kids of my own, if they asked where they were from. But it was a really like a self push journey for me. Yeah.
yeah, no, it's one of those things where I was raised to be proud of all the different cultures I was part of. Each section was like, "You're this." Each section, "You're this." Like, don't forget you're this. Uh,
Hmm.
and I'm here in LA going, I guess I'm all of that. I mean, my whole life was always carrying, as you know, carrying it all with me and making it work for me. But I remember I had a different, each grandparent was a different race basing or different culture. So each one would tell me what was important. And it was like, it's all confusing. My sister, my daughter. I mean, I don't know what's going on here. And but I remember, yeah, exactly. And then it's who you're with the most
Yeah.
obviously influences everything. And being out here, the lot was 10 blocks away. So I know Creole culture more than probably all of it because I grew up going to her house. We spent summers at our house. We were always there together. I know how to cook the food. I've been to Louisiana. I mean, I did the whole thing. So and there's a big Creole culture here in South LA. So I got that one. And then but then my Puerto Rican, my Dutch, all those, I had relatives who would come to me or I'd go to them and they would tell me about it. Like, no, you have to. Like, oh my God, it's a strong. And again, they're strong cultures. They're very different, but strong cultures. I've been to Puerto Rico, the whole thing. I mean, so it's like one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, I get it.
Hmm.
The West Indian thing was always there, and I would hear stories, and I'm actually still finding out stuff now. But I would hear stories, but like I said back in the day, it was they were proud where they were, but I would hear other people talk crap, almost cussed, about West Indians in general.
Right.
Um, and this was also pre-cruising, where now the cruises all go down there. They go to Curacao and Aruba, all the way down there now. And I mean, I guess you could count Saint Kitts and
Yeah.
and Baba and all those things. I mean, they're all part of Saint Lucia. They're all part of those islands down there. That's the reason why I went to Barbados was because my ship went to Barbados. Didn't go to Trinidad and Tobago, which is like right over there. Didn't do all that. Uh,
Right.
but it went here, and that's where we went. And I went, oh, there we go, and then went back up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, back then, I think before people understood the culture of it, the appeal was, all the other islands in that little chain are volcanic, but Barbados is a coral island. So it's kind of like, oh well, there's some nice things in the water. Let's get the hell up out of here. And so if you were looking to go to Trinidad or Guyana, that wasn't going to happen. But now as we get more and more knowledgeable, maybe thanks social media for that, there's now people going, today we're going to show you the airport in St. Martin or St. Bart's or
Well,
things near visitors.
The problem with Guyana, we had that huge Jonestown massacre thing happen. I was saying when
Oh yeah.
because that was in '78.
Hmm.
I just did a show on. I just watched a documentary on. I did a show on one of my other shows I do. We talked about because I remember that massacre, and no one had heard of Guyana. Not back. This is '70. Nobody heard of Guyana. We know there's a bunch of islands, there's a bunch of things over there in South and that part of South America. Everybody talks about the other parts of South America, but like there's that whole section over here. Yeah, 'cause black folks over there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I can talk about it. Um, and the Jonestown massacre, which he brought 911 black people over there. Basically, they killed them all. So
Sure.
that was not a destination spot for especially a lot of black folks on the cruising
And
side.
Operation Urgent Fury, if you that
Yes,
too, that was in the early '80s as well. So like no one was going to go to the Grenada. You know, it's the Spice Islands. Like, nah, we good.
yeah, it was like yeah, great
We're
Grenadier.
fine.
It was all yeah, all that was like
Yeah, we're fine.
limits. It was all little off limits.
Hmm.
So yes, there's some things that happen, but when you look, but when it was showing on this documentary, they were showing how beautiful it was. That's why he picked it as a paradise. It was paradise on Earth. It
Yeah,
was beautiful. I mean, it was like he tarnished it with what he did there, but it wasn't
sure.
beautiful. Like many of these islands, as I'm learning more about St. Eustatius and how beautiful it is, it's like, wow, I had no idea. But I've been to all the other islands, and many of them are beautiful. With several cultures mixed together in there.
Absolutely.
One of the things I want to talk about is that's kind of interesting because the Caribbean is such a mixture.
Hmm.
We have the African side of things, Spanish, French, English, Dutch, and American, all just kind of swirling in down in there. I always find that very interesting because every
Absolutely.
island is very different, and every island has its own. And some islands have all that in one. Like say go to Barbados, and that was the first time I went there. I went there what 17 years ago, whatever, 18 years ago.
Hmm.
That was the first time I drove on the wrong side of the street. The wrong side.
I mean,
Uh,
it is 80% of the world drives on the right hand side. So there you go.
right, exactly. So I'm joking, folks, of course, but it was a trip for me. I was like, oh, in the Caribbean where I'm doing this. Oh, because it's British. Got it. Like it took. I didn't know. I had no idea what Barbados was about.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely one of the colonial things, and you're right about the mix of cultures. This is why when I look at ethnic forms, I think I give the SATs all the credit because it actually had Afro-Caribbean as an option because usually they'll say, "Oh, you're African American." I'm like, "Well, no," because my parents are from this country. And someone's like, "Well, there's some African in there." And you're like, "Well, there was the Siboney, the Arawak, the Caribs. My dad's side were the Scottish. I mean, I'm not sure if you have time to talk about the Redlegs. I mean, the Redlegs were a whole different ethnic group within an ethnic group.
I don't know
So
what things are. What are they?
so when Barbados was basically it was uninhabited when it was discovered, right, by the British. And so when they wanted to develop, they had a bunch of indentured servitudes, not slaves, indentured servants, because I know people get into it from Ireland. And the Irish were promised that if they did 6 or 7 years of work, that they'll get pieces and patches of land. These are known as the Redlegs because they were so fair skinned the sun would burn them, and so they would be actually red. And so when England was disposed, I mean, as a Commonwealth or so, the Irish go, all right, where's our land? And of course, the British are like, nah, we never said that. And the black folks are like, you look like the British. And so to this day, the poorest Bajans on that island are white Irish people up in the hills, just like chilling, like not getting access to proper care. And but when I say that though, when I say I'm Barbadian American, yeah, you can't discount that part of history. I'd be saying, oh, I look a certain color, even though I get like confused with Dominican all the time. I don't think that I am, but I was saying you're forgetting about the African influence, the British influence, Scottish, Irish, American, Arawak, Siboney, Taino. Everyone's kind of a melting pot there.
Oh, Flobo showed a picture of his father. Well, he showed a picture of his dad. I showed my mother, and I go, "Who does it look like?" My
Hmm.
father.
Hmm.
Your father was that light skinned in. My father's multiracial, biracial. So, but your mother was so light skinned in that I was like, he looked just like my daddy.
I know we're jumping around here, but my dad is so fair skinned. When he got to this country, he tried to find a way to make hay, and he got dismissed for being Caribbean. He had an accent and everything, and got a job at the MTA. And if you guys know about the MTA, the public transportation system in the 70s, you could not get in that company at all if you weren't Italian. Like it was mobbed up. Like the crime families ran transit. And so my dad didn't necessarily consciously depend to be Italian, but he passed. And he started wearing monogram shirts, and he started making eggplant parmesan. And so like my culinary background is Caribbean Italian because he knew that was the only way to provide for his family because he was that fair skinned. So to say that, well, I'm black, I'm Caribbean, discounts not only my dad's struggles because of how his skin was, but rather the whole different history of him getting to that color entirely.
Ooh, the Italians. My grandpa Bob Roberto, he would go into these restaurants that were run by Italians. This is back in the 80s. I go with them, and he fit in with them. You would have thought he was Italian. I mean, he just fit right. He just the way they all talk the same. They all pinky rings and cigars. Like my grandfather had a cigar in his mouth all the time. That's so funny that and the way they dressed and adult breasted suits and just whatever. It's like you would get mistaken for Italian or whatever all the time. There was always a fight. It's like, oh, Roberto, oh my God, and like, okay, that works. I mean, we had a couple restaurants we go to, and we get great service, and he was a big tipper. That was always this big thing, a big tipper. And actually, I talk about him I'm going to be in a book by this guy named Ted Page about grandparents, and so he's one of the ones I talk about because he was a big influence on me too because he was just such a larger life character. I'm assuming I got part of my personality from him. I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, I can believe that. Big personality. I can see that.
I'm sure. He was like, you walk in and just people noticed him. Um, the downsides. I want to make sure it's a well-rounded conversation. We talked about a little bit of downsides already. Have you found any downsides to being Caribbean in America?
I do think there's still an ignorance about the breadth and depth of what we do. I think we're at the point where there's awareness, which is good, right? Oh wow, because when I was a kid, no one knew who you were. Where's that? But now you're seeing like the downside of awareness, where people kind of cafeteria pick the things they like and aspects they don't. You'll see, oh yeah, look at this fusion Jamaican beef patty meets potato salad. You're like, well, why? You know what I mean? Or you're seeing now pop music take from Afro beats and calypso for their music without giving back to the original artist. And
Oh yeah.
I remember one time someone on Instagram did a history of Latin music and mentioned that reggaeton was from Puerto Rico. And I'm not Puerto Rican though, but that was kind of funny because reggaeton isn't Puerto Rican necessarily. Well, it was, but it was taken heavily from reggae and Espanol. So how do you tell the story of one music genre without mentioning Panama, which is like the biggest musical influencer of that region? So we're at that point now where you're like trying to fend for it, where like history gets lost, the slave uprisings aren't told because that's too much of a downer, but we sure do love carnival costumes. And it's like, well, wait, you don't get to do that. Like you gotta take both. You know what I'm saying? So
Yes, that's very true. And every island I go to, they have color issues, but they like to praise their forefathers. And I'm not going to do it out loud, but there's certain countries, folks, where they whitewash some of their forefathers for
mhm.
pictures and for statues. Dominican Republic. There are places that do that. That I was like, wow, that's what they do here. Got it. Um,
Yeah,
because of the African influence. And if you go to Africa, they don't want you. They're like, you're not African.
absolutely. Yeah,
You're
you're from the
American.
United States.
You're
Yep.
Black American. But
Hmm.
I'm Caribbean. No, we don't give a fuck. We don't care about that. You're not us. West
Exactly.
Africa, my family's gone there. They're like, oh yeah, they don't. And they've had some. My family's had some fun there too. But they're saying, but that's the whole thing. It's like they think there's something separate, and you and I know Nigerians, and I'm now 25% Nigerian, 26% Nigerian. I get
Congrats.
many of them, but they say I look like them. But I'm like, but they're a whole different class on their own too. Very much so,
Absolutely.
think very highly of themselves. They carry themselves a certain way. A lot of African nations, they don't got bones to their noses and hoodoo all over. Like there's some rich countries over there with rich pride. I'll say that.
Right. Well, there are some similarities, which is interesting across the diaspora, right? Like I tell people all the time when I meet someone from Nigeria, we have a food called fried bake, and that's kind of our one of our basic breakfast foods. But the Nigerians call it puff puff, or in Barbados, what we call conky. I believe the Belizeans call dukunu, or the Puerto Ricans call pasteles, or the Mexicans call tamales. It's the same thing, right? But at the same time, you're right. These people look like you, but they're not you. Cultures differently, manners are differently, like the music's different, the way they respond to conversations different. So it ends up being like this almost surreal Earth to separate dimension version of the homeland where it kind of looks the same, but it's completely different.
You mentioned food. Sancocho is my favorite things, and I first had it in Dominican Republic, and I learned later that other countries have their own version of sancocho. I did not know that.
Oh yeah.
Where else? But saying that's what I'm saying. I didn't know that. So basically, what you're saying, I agree with. I'm finding out a lot of it's the same or different variations of.
Mm-hmm.
But they hold it so close to them, like, no, this is what we do, and that it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I just did a Belizean woman who was like all about Dukanu. And I was like, this is a conky. She goes, I don't know what that conky stuff is. I was like, look, lady, it's the same. It's not, but it is. You know what I'm
I
saying?
know, and the thing, I told this with Creole culture too, because Jamaicans and they speak patois and all that stuff, and like the we call it broken French in Louisiana, and I don't speak it. My grandmother does. I don't speak it. I didn't learn it. But I had friends. My godson's Jamaican, half Jamaican, but his mother speaks it. But then they say go to Belize, and they have their Creole Spanish, where in Louisiana they're Creole French. I think it's
Mhm.
more than one Creole. Well, apparently there is. There's similarities in some things, but they really make a distinction. And so and they're not far from each other geographically. You start looking at the maps, but it's kind of like you do learn that there's like variations. And when I was in the Dominican Republic, I had a hard time leaving. They thought I was one of them, and I went through customs. It took a long time to let me out the country. I just speak Spanish and everything. They didn't believe me. And I'm like, I'm not from here. I'm like, here's my passport. I'm like, right, they didn't believe me,
Yeah.
and that was kind of weird. My father had a problem once leaving Mexico years ago in the '70s. They thought he was Mexican. He had the curly hair or that wavy hair, and he was that coloring. He got dark. He got dark that summer whenever being in Mexico City.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, we all kind of look related to each other, but yeah,
Right. Yeah. We're all the same, but different. We're all
different.
different, but the
Hey, we're all saying a different thing.
same.
Um, I don't know. Any last thoughts about the region? I mean, is it? I feel like of course, Puerto Ricans, we got the whole throwing towels at us from President Trump back in the whatever. Haiti's always having lots of issues going on. Barbados, I guess, not too long ago, got their game to get their independence, so to speak. Like they're like symbolically independence or something.
Yeah, they were well, no, they became a republic 2 years ago. So
Okay,
like so in 1966 they became a Commonwealth of England or United Kingdom. And so that's the official Independence Day. But 2 years ago, in 55 years, they became a republic, which was controversial because one of the things about Bayesian history is that when it comes down to how we were so closely linked to the English colonial system, a lot of the older Bajans loved the fact that we were the more literate islands in the Caribbean, or a lot of the good slaves were here. A lot of England built a lot of the roads; they were maintained well. The idea to leave from England was seen as a rejection of culture, bite the hand that feeds us to become more Americanized. Whereas younger Bajans were kind of like, why are we giving props to this other country entirely? We need to like go out on our own. So about 2 years ago, they became a republic, and so now they're completely freestanding, which is the opposite of say like Australia. Australia is still connected to the British Crown that level. So it's kind of a weird thing. My parents' generation hated the idea. I'm like, burn it down, burn everything down, start over. But yeah,
yeah, that's the thing too. I mean, as we're getting further and further away from those generations, and people, the younger kids want freedom. They want freedoms. They don't care about the patriarchy and the monarchies and all that. They don't care about that stuff. Seems like.
yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, oh, thanks for the assist. We got it from here.
And I love it. Well, thank you for being part of my brethren. Thank you. Flobo, I appreciate you very much. My Caribbean brethren. Folks, where can they find you if they want to find you? He's in America, folks. He lives here, but where can they?
Yeah, this is like roll down your window, like, oh. Oh, no. Yeah. So check me out at flobito.com. That's FLOBITO.com. And if you want to see my take on sports and culture and travel, check out justthe sandwich.com. That's justthe sandwich.com.
Just a sandwich, bitches. Just the sandwich.
I didn't say bitches. I don't know
I
why.
said it, bitches.
Why would I
Bitches.
say why would I say that?
Just the sandwich. It's a good blog. I'm James Lott Jr. You can follow me around James Lott Jr. is sold at James Lott Jr. on all social media platforms. And this show is everywhere. And I'm doing deep dives. And as I'm learning about Satan stations, I'm sharing that with you every episode. Talking about my great grandmother, talking about my great great grandfather, which I'm learning more about, my grandpa John. So follow that along and other people coming on. We're talking all things Caribbean, but mostly about my journey to St. Eustatius and what's going on. Or maybe one day I'll be there and I'll be able to do something from there. That's my goal at some point. I know, I'm very excited. It's been a fun journey. Thank you, Flobo. Thank you, guests and people watching and listening.